welcome to Church Experience Online. We're so happy you joined us today. As you watch this teaching video, if you have any questions or need help getting connected, please don't hesitate to reach out by phone or email. Also, our website is the best place to go if you'd like to access helpful Grow Step resources, join a serving team, connect in a life group, get your questions answered, or support this movement financially by giving online. At the end of this teaching video, you'll hear one of our Church Experience Worship original songs, and we hope this gives you an opportunity to worship and reflect on what you've learned. Thanks again for joining us at Church Experience Online.
I'm going to share with you a story from the book of Luke. It's a story that you're probably familiar with, but I think one that probably will resonate with you wherever you're at right now, and especially where our country's at and our world's at. And it's found in Luke chapter 8, beginning in verse 22. It says, "One day Jesus said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side of the lake.' So they got into the boat and they set out. As they sailed, he fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake." Now, a squall is really fierce wind. Like if you get like a windstorm, it might last for a few seconds or so. A squall is like for minutes, it's just gusts, like huge gusts of wind that stir up massive waves. And it says that the squall came down on the lake so that the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. Did you guys hear about the boat at Disney just last week that started like sinking with people on it at Disney? They had to come rescue them, and thankfully everybody was okay. Well, this is like way worse than that, because you're literally out in the middle of a lake in the middle of a storm and your boat's sinking. So you're fearing for your life, and that's exactly what happened. They knew they were in great danger. Verse 24, the disciples went and they woke him up. They woke Jesus, said, Master, we're going to drown." This is the incredible part. He got up, he rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided and all was calm. "Where is your faith?" he asked his disciples. In fear and amazement, they asked one another, "Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." Wow. What a story. You know, they're out on this boat, a massive storm comes up. Jesus stands against the storm and says, "Be still," and the storm is calm. And it's this great lesson to these followers of his that Jesus is greater even than the biggest storms in their life. And what I thought was interesting about this story, if you look a little closer at it, is that how unexpectedly things changed. On the one hand, a squall comes out of nowhere, there in verse 22. And then later in verse 24, Jesus stands up and he rebukes the storm, "Peace be still," and the storm calms. And so unexpectedly in one moment, something comes out of nowhere and comes into their life, this unexpected storm. And then just moments later, this huge thing that they were staring at and all afraid of, it had subsided. And although there was this significant up and down in the arc of their story, what was there through the whole time was Jesus. And he questioned their faith, because in the midst of the fear, they started to panic and they were worried, and they were not just concerned. It's okay to be concerned. You're concerned like when you see something and you take precautions and you want to make sure your boat doesn't sink. But they started to fear. And Jesus said, "Where is your faith?" And what he was saying is that, you know, there's going to be unexpected things that come into our lives. There's going to be things in your career, in your health, in your life, in the news, in the world, things that come in unexpectedly. That's going to be, the thing that they say never changes is change. You're going to have some things that change, and you've lived long enough to know this. And it's okay to have caution and concern and make preparations and all that, but Jesus is saying you don't need to fear, because even though things come into your life unexpectedly, I'm there with you. And then Jesus stood and he calmed the storm. And although the arc of their story, there was this significant up, there's this significant down, there's all this unexpected things happening, Jesus was there through it all. And how do you put down fears when they come into your life? It's through faith. That's how it's through faith. It's getting your eyes off what's right in front of you and putting your eyes on God. Doesn't mean you're not aware of your surroundings, but you say, "God, I'm keeping my faith in you." And how do you overcome uncertainty when you don't know what tomorrow holds? It's courage. It's courage and confidence in God, saying, "God, I know that you're with me. You're in the boat with me. I'm not alone. You're here and you're present with me." And so I love that story. And one of the things that really comes to my mind when I think about that story is how it's so similar to all of our lives, right? because you and I both have had so many different turns and twists in our life journey that we probably never saw coming. And it's not until we look back on the storm or the mountain that we conquered or the battle that we fought, it's not usually until we look back and we say, well, man, in my 20s, I didn't realize all that God was doing, or in my 30s, all that God was doing, or in my 40s, or whatever. I didn't realize how he was at work, or when I was a student, or when I was single, or when I was just having kids, or when I was going into the retirement stage. I didn't know all the things God was doing until I got through it and I looked back. And in the midst of the storms of our life, we don't always see how God's at work. But I'm confident the more I go on in life is that God is always at work in my life in the middle of whatever it is that I'm going through. And I don't always know it while I'm in it, but I know who's with me in that boat. And so I'm learning, this is just me, I'm learning more and more that as I go through unexpected, uncertain things in my life, as challenges come and hardships and great opportunities that I didn't expect or see coming, just to keep my eyes on Jesus, to put down fear with faith, to handle the uncertainty with confidence in God, trusting that God is working out a bigger story. He's never going to leave me. The best is always yet to come. And through any up and down in my life, God's always present. Well, when we think about a story and we look back and we see how God's at work, for me, I think of a family in our church that I've got to know now for quite some time. They've become great friends for Jennifer and I. And just to see how God's been at work in their story, the ups and downs, I wanted you to hear that today. And so I asked them last minute, I told them the situation, like, hey, I've heard your story before. It's incredible. And our guest speaker this weekend said he can't come. He's having a baby. Would you guys be willing to share your story with our church and just let me interview you? And so they agreed. And I want you, if you would, just give a really warm welcome to some folks that you know and love, Keith and Dawnyele Savage. Come on out, guys. Yeah, let's welcome them. I love these guys, and I'm so excited to learn from their story today. Thank you guys for being willing to do this. We're so grateful. So grateful. Thanks, Keith. Well, you may or may not know much of their story, but I know you're going to learn some things today. And I just want to start out. You guys could just tell us about your family, what you guys do for your career. Help us get to know you for those who haven't had a chance to meet you yet.
Sure. Well, I know he said we agreed. He actually called and I said no. It was short notice. And it's really funny. I was listening to a podcast that morning and I actually made one note from that podcast that said, make the necessary choices to extend your influence and to make God known. You know, and you call me and the first thing I say is no. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And after a little nudge from you and some prayer with my beautiful wife here, we decided we do have a great God story. We're excited to share it. I am happy to be up here with Dawnyele for you guys to hear from her as well as our story individually and our marriage. We have a 6-year-old boy, Bruce, and a 3-year-old daughter that's 3 years old.
That's awesome. And Keith also leads our usher team. So if you've seen him floating around in the back, coordinating details, that's one of his main roles here at the church. And these guys have had a lot of ministry experience, a lot of life experience. We're going to learn a lot today. But let's start out this way. It's not often that you have a former professional athlete attending your church. And Keith, you've had a pretty epic career when it comes to sports. And maybe most people don't know about that. So if you could, tell us a little bit about your career in athletics and then also what your journey with God was like in the early years.
Sure. I was not raised a Christian. I'm going to skip pretty much my whole young life. It's cool how it's come full circle. I played every sport. I loved every sport. I worked hard for good grades. Whatever the sport was, if it was golf, I was putting around the house. If it was soccer, I was kicking a ball around the house. I played everything. I didn't have the goal of being a professional athlete. My dad did play for the U.S. national team. He played in the Olympics. He was a professional soccer player, so I loved soccer. But I loved everything. I went to a Division II college in my hometown, Pensacola. It was University of West Florida. And because our team was so talented, by the end of that, I had an opportunity to go to a professional tryout. And it was in Florida, and a lot of those athletes were coming from up north in the cold. And so I performed really well at the tryout. And I got a call from the coach saying, I just drafted you. I was their only draft pick. It was Chivas USA and MLS. I had no idea where that was. I called my dad. I said, I just got drafted. Where's Chivas USA? It was in Los Angeles, across the country. And the coach had just said, can you get fit? And I said, yes, sir. So I called my dad, hung up, went outside, went for a run.
That's great.
And little did I know how hard it was going to be. I had not signed a contract. I went out. It was 2 very brutal months, and the grind of professional sports began. I realized how selfish I was my whole life. I wasn't a Christian. So this was a wake-up call. I did eventually sign a pro contract through hard work and had some amazing experiences. I played against David Beckham and Landon Donovan and in front of thousands and thousands of people in L.A. It was a hard year, but that was a neat moment. And the next year, I signed with the Portland Timbers. And you would think that I was just on top of the world. I didn't expect to be a professional athlete. Portland is a really neat city. One of the darkest cities in the U.S. spiritually, but soccer is crazy. You feel like you're in Europe. Sold out stadiums every time. I was playing every game. When I was in MLS, the top flight, this is Major League Soccer in Chivas, I didn't play every game. I maybe played 6 that whole year. But in Portland, I played every game. I didn't always start, but I had a great start of my career in Portland. And the neat part of this is I'm normally a pretty joyful guy, but I was miserable. I was certainly missing something, to the point where the coaches were even saying, "What's wrong with you?" Coaches are pretty blunt. All my coaches have been pretty tough throughout my career. But I think the neatest part of my God story is I was on top. I was above what I ever expected. I was playing in an amazing city for a huge team, getting paid to play soccer. And it was in that moment that I was not fulfilling my purpose and very miserable. And a teammate invited me to church, a church that looked very much like this one, not what I envisioned church to be. We were in a warehouse, and in Portland, everybody dresses weird and wears Converse and skinny jeans, and the worship was incredible, and I was immediately drawn, and the pastor was sharing about joy, putting Jesus first and others second, yourself last. And I just realized in that moment, everything was about me, my whole life. And I, within a couple months of attending that church, gave my life to Christ. I'll never forget it. That's on awesome. October 4th, 2009, on a day of a game. I was playing on ESPN later that day in the playoffs. Wow. I shouldn't have been going to church. And I went, and the pastor asked me to stick around, and I gave my life to him and had a complete 180. And I think the coolest part is that, a lot of people hit rock bottom to find Jesus. I was at the top, and it wasn't enough. I needed Jesus.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a great story. Isn't that powerful? I mean, that's great. To know that you, like you said, you had it all. You had what everyone else was looking at, but there was still something inside that, and that's not enough. And I think that's why the gospel message of Jesus is so important and so powerful, that no matter what you can attain in life, no matter what heights you can get to, it's never going to be enough if you don't have in your soul that peace. And so that's really cool. Now, in that season, while you were going through all this craziness and pursuing soccer and succeeding, Dawnyele, what dreams were you chasing? What kind of goals did you have in that season of life, and how was God at work in your life?
So I was a softball player, and a dream that I had was to play softball in college, and that's pretty much the highest level you can get to for girls softball. And I received a scholarship to play at the University of West Florida. That's where Keith and I met. So I was just a freshman. He's older than me when we met. And actually, he asked me out a few times before I said yes. But when I did, I quickly knew I really liked him. And I was a Christian, but he was not. And so it really was not healthy for my relationship with the Lord, because I kind of drifted away and kind of made excuses. He was a very good guy by the world standards, but he eventually kind of became the most important thing to me. And we dated for about a year and a half. And then we dated once he got that pro stint to go play over. We tried long distance, and it was really tough. And he ended up coming back and breaking up with me. I know. And it was honestly devastating, because I think at that point in my life, I felt like my value and my identity came from what other people thought of me, and what I could accomplish, and the statuses I could wear. So as you're talking about dreams, a big thing that was important to me was really the status of starting on this college softball team. And so I was a really hard worker, and also having good grades. I got good grades. I worked hard for that, got good grades, but didn't seem to satisfy we were talking about. So I just figured if I started, that would be it for me. And so I worked really hard. I came, early before practice for extra hitting, stayed late for extra fielding. But my coach really had made up her mind about me, and I actually would not ever really get to play in my position at center field because she wanted me to be a pinch runner, which at the college level, once you go in and do like sub in for somebody to run, you have to come out of the game and you can't come back in. And so I really struggled with that because I had had so much success on every team I had been on up until this point. And man, I was at a really low point with that, coupled with the breakup, and just kind of struggle with my identity and insecurity. And it was at that point that I kind of on a whim went to church, and I don't remember what the message was about, but I remember that I could feel the Holy Spirit, and it was like a fog was lifted, and I could see that even though I claimed to be a Christian, I wasn't living for Christ. I was living for myself and all these ideas that I thought life was about. And so I just remember praying and asking God for forgiveness and asking him to take control of my life, and that I wanted to recommit my life to him. And so I got plugged in at that church and got some great godly community, and it made all the difference in my walk with Jesus. You know, I got to wrestle through all the tough questions and just dig through scripture with these people, and I just grew so much. And before long, one of the people in this group actually challenged me to start a fellowship of Christian athletes at our college campus, to use my platform as an athlete for that. And I kind of was like, yeah, good idea, I'll pray about it. But inside, I was like, no way, I can't do that. I've never really even been to an FCA meeting. How am I going to start and lead one on a college campus? But the more I read my Bible, God bombarded me with scripture like, I use the weak to shame the strong, and my strength is made perfect in weakness. And, I've not given you a spirit of fear, but of love and power and a sound mind. And so I just remember being like, okay, I know you want me to do this. I will say yes, but I literally need you to do everything else because I don't know how to start a mini church on our college campus. And so my college roommate had two teammates who played basketball who I knew were Christians, and I recruited them. We started praying just in a circle around our kitchen table, asking, Lord, please show up, please provide all these things, worship and people to come and a place to meet, and even the ability to get our application approved from the college. And man, he showed up in such a huge way. We that little 3-person circle grew, to over 50 students just packing out this tiny little place, and it was incredible. We had a Canadian basketball player who told us, I'm an atheist, you can't change my mind. She went to one of these meetings and she got saved.
That's incredible.
And yeah, and her eternity has changed forever. My college roommate was not a Christian, and she's now a full-time missionary in Peru. So it's cool, got to be that up close and see God work all these miracles. When you just say yes, you may feel incapable, but God is capable of immeasurably more than you can imagine. And so
powerful.
Yeah.
It's in a very secular environment, too.
Yes.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and so our church aisles started to be packed with all these athletes and non-athletes. We invited everybody. It was incredible. And so on my senior night in softball, that's kind of this big celebration they have for all the seniors. They get to play in their position for sure, on senior night. And I didn't play in my position. But, I took heart in Paul's writing, 2 Corinthians 4, 17 and 18 says, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, for what is seen is temporary, and what is unseen is eternal. And that he's made everything beautiful in its time. And I was just so thankful for the trials because they really brought me to a place where I could experience God so much more closely. And so my goals shifted from just all this success, field success, academic success, to wanting to be used by God and to tell people about him. So.
That is absolutely incredible. And a couple things that you said there that really were powerful to me before we move on in your story. One is that just the amazing ways God can work through anyone's life if you say yes to him. And I believe God's working in all of our stories and all the time. And some of you, God's has such great plans in your life, and you're waiting on him to unfold those plans, but he's really waiting on you. He's just waiting on you to say yes. And it wasn't that there was like this perfect opportunity where there was like dozens of people are saying, hey, Dawnyele, come, let's start this thing. It was you and a couple people, and like you got together and prayed, and God worked through that on a secular, in a secular environment that where I'd imagine someone here in their workplace thinking, I wish God would show up. And he wants to, and he's maybe waiting for them to say yes. Another thing that really hit me is not only just the power of when we say yes to Jesus, but just in both your stories. Keith, you first said, I was a secular or non-believing soccer player with a lot of success, and I probably shouldn't have been in church this day, but I came to church. There was something missing inside. And Dawnyele, just to see the power of your journey, like when you kind of drifted away and there was this moment of coming back to Jesus, you showed up at a church. And I think in our culture now, especially with technology and so many things that have changed and we've become more of a secular culture, I think there's some message out there in some people's mind like, well, is church relevant anymore? Church as we know it. Maybe I'll just go pray on my own or watch something on YouTube or something, and that'll be good. I don't need others to really kind of live out the church. And I think that's in two ways a misunderstanding of how God works and is working through his church. Now, God works in so many different ways, and here on a college campus, but I've seen personally that when someone who doesn't know Jesus, they want to find their way back to him, or for the first time, they typically think, well, I got to find a church to go to. And their first step is usually to find some body of believers, whether they're in a living room or in an auditorium or wherever, and they go step in and usually sit in the back, and they kind of observe a little bit, maybe for a few weeks or a few months, and God gets a hold of their life, and he changes them. And so I just think what we do is so powerful, and you being in the church and being aware of that there's people in your life that don't know Jesus and that they're looking for answers, whether they have drifted spiritually from where they used to be or they're looking for answers, and just being aware of how God could use your invitation to bring someone to him and saving faith in him is just so powerful. Well, it's awesome to hear about your career journeys and where that's taken you, but you guys also have a pretty epic love story, and it's amazing when I've heard it, just like, wow, how God put the pieces together. So how did God bring you guys together? How has he worked in your journey and your story? Maybe to encourage someone here who's single, maybe for those of us who are with someone, just to remind us of how God works in our relationship.
Okay, so we definitely, once he broke it off with me, we tried to work it out long distance, on and off, but it was really tough. And honestly, Jesus was not our first love, and Keith wasn't even a Christian. So, it's amazing the power of prayer, because I had prayed for him for years, even before going through all of like the heartache and the struggle, because I knew he wasn't a Christian. I knew he needed salvation. But then there were these really intense moments, when we were separated, and I just cried out to Jesus to, please help him. He's such a good guy. Help him to recognize his need to be saved and to experience a full life in Jesus. And it's so neat that God brought him to one of the least saved cities in the U.S. on a mountaintop, and for him to recognize that wasn't enough. And so basically what happened was one day we had no contact for, a good 6 months or so, and he texted me out of the blue and said, hey, I'm in the off season. Do you mind if I stop by? I just want to chat with you for a minute. And I'm like, okay, sure. This is so surprising. So he shows up on my doorstep, and he tells me that he's given his life to the Lord while he was in Portland. And I remember praying fervently, Lord, you have fully healed and restored my heart. I am just praying for him to be saved. So use a girlfriend to bring him to church. I'm so good, and I always say God's so gracious, because he used a teammate to bring him to church. And so he dropped him on my doorstep to tell me he got saved, and wanted to make sure I would be okay if he attended the church that I had brought him to a few years ago, because his pastor told him, when you go home, you need to get plugged into a church. You need to start serving there. And so I said, yeah, that's fine. By the way, God's calling me to start this FCA thing. Maybe you can come. You're a pro athlete. Maybe come share your story and help out. And so he did, and we worked closely together for about 3 months. We got engaged, and we got to start over with a pure Christ-centered relationship, and we got married 9 months later. And so now we call each other our number twos. Jesus is our number one, and I love God's redemptive power and how he can just redeem anything, any broken relationship. So
That's so awesome. Yeah, that's incredible. One of the things I really love about that too is that you were praying for him, and you cared more about his spiritual life than you even being together with him. And as someone who cared immensely about him, you're like, God, even if you need to use another girl to bring him to Christ, Jesus, your will be done. And God in his grace and brought you guys together. And that's so cool. And I've heard parents say that same kind of thing when they have a child who's drifted far from God, to say things like, God, I want the best for this child, but whatever you need to do, whatever it takes, because the most important thing is that they follow you and they find you. And that was your desperate prayer, and just to see the power of prayer, that God reached across the miles. And some of you have people you care about that are far away, maybe geographically, and that God used your prayers in one location to make an impact in Keith's life somewhere else and brought him to your doorstep. Yeah. Literally. That's amazing. Some single person out here today, one of the services, is like, I'm starting praying today. Bring him to my door, God. It's like checking out the windows. Is he here? So it's awesome. Well, one more question I want to ask you guys, and we can talk about this. There's probably a number of different ways, not only what's happened in the past, but what's happening now. And that's just, how has God been working in your life since that time? Maybe even in ministry, how he's used you, some of the things that you're a part of now, maybe some of the lessons you've learned. And just kind of what comes to mind when you think about the big picture of your journey and how God's been at work?
Going back to that moment, I was going back to Portland for a year during that engagement, and that was the easiest, most joyful year, even further away from where Los Angeles that distance was, because God was the center. And we were so excited to get married. We got married, and I had a few options on the table. One, go to Europe, two, try to go back in MLS, or there was this startup team called FC Tampa Bay in our hometown, or not in our hometown, but in Florida. And I knew we were getting married, and with some encouragement from coaching staff and some help from them as well, I signed with Tampa Bay, which eventually became Tampa Bay Rowdies. And that was the beginning of our marriage. 7 years with the Rowdies. There were so many trials, but looking back, it's been really fun to reflect and see what God's done. I mean, I was a baby Christian. Going into, it was great to change and go to a new professional locker room where I could go in and start out, saying, I'm a Christian, this is who I am, this is my identity, because it's a tough environment to be in. And it was, encouraging guys to come to prayer before games. It started very small, to also the uncertainty of the professional life. Every year we didn't know if we were going somewhere new. We didn't know if, we were going to have a home when she got pregnant with Bruce. In fact, we were in a mission home without air condition. And
we moved 12 times in our first 7 years of marriage, so that was fun.
Yeah. That is crazy. Wow.
We won a championship with the Rowdies, got bought by a big owner. A couple years later was cut. And every offseason, by the way, is 4 months. And then that one, I was actually released from the team. And this was about 3 or 4 years into our marriage. We were working at Calvary Christian High School, and we felt like God was calling us to this area. So it was that moment in particular was one that was like, okay, we feel like you're calling us here. Jacksonville had a new club. They were offering a 4-year contract, which is very rare in the division that I was playing in, the second division. And it was a place where we had to be like, okay, here we are, send us wherever you want to go. We feel like you're calling us to be here, but I think he wanted that to be our heart. So every year we were growing spiritually through all this uncertainty and trials. And a couple weeks later, the owners fired the coach, fired the general manager, hired a new general manager, a new coach. They called me in for preseason. I went in, represented myself, told them this is where I wanted to be. They gave me a trial and offered me a 1-year contract. I took it in a heartbeat because that's where I knew I wanted to be, which led to another 4 years here in Tampa in the beginning of our ministry now. In that first year, I tore my ACL. First game, 20 minutes in, tore my ACL, and that year was the greatest spiritual impact, my greatest growth within the team, my greatest leadership within the team. And I'm so thankful looking back on those trials and where it's brought us to where we are right now.
I want you guys to keep talking about this, but let's just pause for a second. That's exactly what we're talking about today, because some people are going through that storm right now. And for you, it was a torn ACL. So as a professional athlete, it doesn't get much worse than that. And it eliminates your ability to compete. Right. And I don't know what your storm is, but to see them literally going through that storm in the middle of that crisis, and you said that's the time that you grew spiritually the most. And I feel like I've said that so many times in different ways to people as they've talked to me as their pastor and say, hey, I'm going through this struggle. I'm going through this trial. It's not how I want it to go. I'm in the midst of the storm. And I've tried to communicate what you just said so well, so many times that maybe this could be a time where God strengthens you, strengthens your character, your resolve, your perseverance, your faith. And because for me, when I look back, I know it's not the times when things went really well that I grew. And you get lazy and apathetic when things go well. Everything's going the way you want it to. It's like, okay, great. And life can become about you. It can be very self-centered. But when things are challenging and a struggle, that's when you really grow. And I look back on the year we started Church Experience, and it was the hardest year of my life. But it was probably the most fulfilling year of my life as well. And so that was just really cool to hear you say that Keith. We'll keep going. Share more about, bring us to current day, too, and some of the ways that God's been working and is working.
Yeah. Maybe you can pour into this more, but right away when she came here, her dad had great aspirations for her to work in the corporate world. In fact, he told me no when I asked if I could marry her. He just said, no, she's going to be this great executive in the corporate world. And she had those abilities, and in fact, she had the job. And just a couple months in, we had a health scare, and she said, if I was going to die tomorrow or in a month, I don't want to be doing this for the rest of my life. I want to do something eternal. And I called my buddy, who was a mentor of mine, who worked in ministry. He's like, I'm hiring a ministry assistant right now. So not only did Dad say no, in the first year of marriage, she left the corporate world, took a low-paying $10 an hour job. And it is so cool to look back. I mean, to the dollar amount, we're pretty organized. We have our budget. He provided, to where we were in the green every month. That was a huge pay cut. Huge pay cut. And then I was flooded with people calling me for private lessons, which I had not done before. And they were just calling. And, it equaled out to the dollar amount. And we kept taking, throughout our 7 years, I feel like we've made steps backwards financially, decisions to make less, to pour into what was important for the kingdom. And, in that same stance, here I am, send me, what do you want from us? And it's been really cool to see God's faithfulness in that, to the point where now we are teachers in a middle school where I said I would never work with middle schoolers ever.
Don't say no to God, right? Never. Famous last words.
And we work together. We're PE teachers together. I love all sports. She loves all sports. And we get to have a blast, love on these kids, tell them about Jesus in a middle school right here in Tampa where we felt, those years ago that God was calling us to be and start our ministry.
And if I know the story right, was it your parents that were also PE teachers together?
Yes.
Is that right? And so it's really cool how God's brought that about. Not only did you follow in your dad's footsteps with professional soccer, but also, that's so neat, you guys. If I could rewind the tape a little bit, because one thing that I think we jumped over that I remember hearing you tell me before that was so cool is even while you were in the locker room of this professional sports team, and as you were starting to follow Jesus, God was giving you a ministry there. What did it look like in that last year or two? And tell us some of that story.
I think as the new ownership came in, we'd always had a team chaplain, but that new ownership didn't want him in the locker room, which was really cool because in the moment, it was hard, but it was also cool because then I became the representative. If we were praying before games, it was because I was leading it. So, one of my roles and what I was most excited about was before games, I would walk around the locker room and ask people to come pray. And in those last couple of years, waves of guys. It went from 2 or 3 to like 15 would get up and walk to this back closet, where a coach would pop in sometimes and pray with us. And that was so cool because I wasn't always a starter, never in my career. Even in Portland, I never was just that guy that was the highest paid and you were playing no matter what. I was always grinding. Every year I had to re-earn my contract. And I think that resonated with guys. I think the way I acted and worked and served when I had my ACL tear showed guys, a little bit of a picture of Jesus, which was really cool. And we saw that. We saw that growth. And I don't know where those guys stand now. Almost every year with the Rowdies, everybody was cut, and everybody is all around the country now. So it was a miracle I was there 7 years because, honestly, they cleaned house every single year. So I think that was really special. And then the last couple of years, I knew that there was something next, but wow, was it hard. I didn't know. I was pursuing many different avenues, coaching professionally, coaching in college, working in the business world. And it's never been easy. It's always been this uncertainty and waiting that's made us rely on Christ and pray all the time. And it's really cool to see where he is right now. All I do know is we knew that we were stronger together and we were better as one. and that we had a purpose, and we pray to be used. And wow, it's really cool to see the ministry that we have right now.
Yeah, and not only are you investing in middle school students, but they have a organization called Savage Soccer, and they have, is it about 100 students or more, something like that?
Yeah.
So it's a massive group of young ones. And what are the ages?
3 to 11.
3 to 11, that they're teaching soccer, and I think that's really a ministry for you guys, and working together in an environment that you get to work in. It's just really cool in church, in the community, to see how the ways that God's using you through all the ups and downs of your story, and just saying yes, and being willing to make sacrifices too. That was something that I pulled out of their story, that am I willing to make sacrifices so that God can use me? Whether for you guys it was career sacrifices, making less money, being willing to move a dozen times around the country, just saying, God, yes, I'm open and I'm available. I just think that's such a beautiful thing. Well, before we pray and wrap up this conversation, was there anything that you would like to say to your church family, any like life lesson or anything that as you look back and you're looking back on the ups and downs of your journey, maybe to encourage someone or something that you've learned, something that God's done that you just want a word of advice, either one of you?
I'll start. I honestly, this last podcast has really resonated with me about making the choices to extend our influence. I think that's really important. As you know, I have this fine line between selfish ambition to grow a business, to grow Savage Soccer to great numbers, but the more important thing is my heart and a place where I want to extend my influence to tell more people about Jesus. So right now we are in a season where we want to know God more, and we also want to make God known. And I think that's a good place to be. And I'm thankful that we also view our marriage that way. We feel like we are called to be stronger as one, and that we pray often for him to use us in our marriage. And whether that's parenting our kids or the ministry of Savage Soccer or Skycrest or foster care, we're in the process of foster care. We just want to make sure we're in a place where here we are, send us, and we're being used.
That's great. Yeah. Awesome.
I think for me, just looking back and like having this time to really reflect on all God's done is just to declare that he's truly faithful and he's trustworthy. And, looking back on some of those years in college, there was a lot of deep hurt and struggle. And, daily I prayed for Keith. And, God is faithful, and he answers those prayers that are in line with his will, and it's not always in our timetable. And so it's easy to look back and be like, that happened fairly quick. But in the season, man, it really felt long and drawn out and dry. And so God is faithful. Just keep your eyes on him, because he is.
Man, that's a good word. Can we thank these guys? What a powerful story. So awesome. This wasn't in our plans originally. Wednesday, even Thursday, we didn't plan this, but I think God had this plan. I know for me, it learned so much, again, just hearing your story freshly, and then hopefully that was powerful for you guys. We're going to pray together, and as we prepare to pray, I want you to just think about how God's at work in your story. And you might not see it right now because you're still living your story, but it's neat every once in a while we can pull back and look back and see how God's been working. Well, know that he's at work right now. And you might not know why and how and all that it's going to unfold, but you can trust that God's with you, and as you say yes and as you make sacrifices, God's going to do greater things in and through your life, through your story, your family, the people that you're connected with, and he's going to use you. Whether it's on a secular college campus, in the locker room of a professional sports team, God is with you wherever you go, and he will use you. Right on?
Thanks for joining us at Church Experience Online. Please don't forget to check out the website if you'd like to get more connected, learn more, get your questions answered, or support this movement financially. You're now going to hear a Church Experience Worship original song, and we hope this gives you an opportunity to worship and reflect on what you learned today.
We can move mountains. Your strength surrounds